Hello and welcome to our 10th year anniversary of our HPCC Systems open source initiative. Hello again, and thank you for listening to this podcast. We have today a couple of great guests, and of course, you know them as good as I do. They've been around and they've been part of the community for so long as well. So, with not need for any introduction here, we have Jim DeFabia and Greg Panagiotatos. They've been absolutely critical to all of our documentation development, to all of our manual generation, and more. And they get involved not just in these things, but also as the platform changes, they do a good chunk of testing as well as they are writing the documentation. So, hello, Jim and Greg, and welcome to this podcast.
Hello, and thank you for having us.
Yeah.
So this has been a ride, right? 10 years of continuous innovation, sustained development, and community growth. So let's start with Jim. So Jim, of course, you've been with LexisNexis Risk Solutions for a very long time, for decades, literally.
Yes.
And you've been, of course, instrumental to documentation forever. But you were around when we decided to go open source. So what was your experience at the time? So what do you think was the biggest game changer back then? And how did you tackle those things?
Well, I think the biggest game changer was when we went open source. We started treating documentation as code, and I think that was very important. We changed our format to be an XML. Our content is an XML format, and we would check it into our version control system just like source code would be checked in, and it would have to go through the review process and be merged just the same way that a new C++ file would get added. And at first that was kind of scary because that was something we'd never done before. But in the long run, it's been very comforting. I don't have to worry about ever losing a file. I don't have to worry about saving things. It's saved locally. It's saved in the remote repository, and there are copies of it all over the place. So it's always maintained in a good version control. So basically, I can do my work from anywhere now, and on any machine. I don't have to save a copy and carry it around with me on a USB drive, or email it to myself, or do any of the funny things we used to do back in the old days.
Well, and also I imagine documentation, not as code, the traditional documentation way. If you have something that you need to change, you need to do search and replace and hope that you found every instance of the thing, right? So it's far less structured than what you have today.
That would be one thing, and another thing would when we weren't under this type of version control, which is text-based and detecting differences, we would have to communicate with each other. Like I'd have to say, "Oh, Greg, today I'm going to be working on the language reference manual, so don't you touch it because I'm going to be working on it," because you didn't want to have two updates made at the same time. Where now with it being an XML format and being under version control, I can work on one chapter of the book while Greg works on another chapter of the same book, and we can make those commits and do a pull request, and they won't conflict.
That is very cool. That is very cool.
So it really improves collaboration in a number of ways. One is that we can work without the need for asking permission, and we also are under strict review process. So every word that gets written gets reviewed before it gets merged, and nothing is allowed to get merged into our main repository without it going through a review process and having it been approved.
Yeah, you when you said work on something without permission, you quickly reminded me of the reason why Git exists today, and we don't use SVM or any of the older version control systems, right? Where someone checked out a piece of code, and then you would go around asking who checked out that thing, or go and check it. So please.
Exactly. You would have
Put it back in, I need to work on it. Yeah, right?
you would have clashes, and then now there is a possibility we still can have a possibility of a clash where we work on the same sentence.
Oh, of course, a
But
conflict.
but then that there's a very easy process in Git to resolve those conflicts. So it's easy.
Very good. Yeah. So Greg, you also joined many years ago. So what was your experience? Tell us a little bit when you joined and how you found yourself in this new organization back then, which is
Well, sure. Actually, I didn't come from very far. I came from the legal and professional side of the house. I worked for there where our actual content was the product we were delivering. And I was working on open source, open standards-based markup languages like XML. And like I said, the content was the product. So that's what we were delivering. I was delivering product. So when we were talking about open sourcing the code for HPCC Systems, that's when I came aboard and I helped with the initial effort to move from word-based documentation system to an open source standards-based XML language, and that gave us a lot of flexibility to do a lot of the things that we're doing now.
So Greg, when you came on board, I remember almost around the time, yes, as you said.
Yeah.
What was your impression there? Because Jim was already working on these documents for a very long time. Now you suddenly came from the outside and found yourself with a pile of documents that you need to convert to something a little bit more modern.
Yeah, that's what I was brought in to do, and that is, that's what I was enjoying. It's a lot of fun to take. I don't want to say anything negative, but the documents were a little bit scattered, a little bit. We didn't have we just had a open source. They weren't open source. They were Word, and I think we had was it not WordPerfect? PageMaker files, and we had we also by doing it the old-fashioned way, we would be in the business of publishing. We actually treated the content. Well, we were in the business of publishing the docs. By moving to an open source based system with XML, we could use some of the engines out there to generate the documentation for us. We didn't have to print PDF books. We had to, we'd print them out to paper. PDF is just an output format that we can take our XML, and from our single source, XML source, we can then generate PDF, which is printable. We could do HTML, which is what we have on the website. We also were able to extend that into creating help files for the product, for the
ECLID.
The IDE, yeah. We were embedding them in the IDE. Sorry, I had blanked out for a second. So yeah, that's where we went, and it was very exciting to work on some new technology, and I definitely enjoy that. It was a lot of fun to help us go from where we were to where we are.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, yeah. Back in the day when we made the decision to go open source, there were so many things that we want to get better. We thought that just making the platform open source wasn't enough, or we needed to. It's not enough to just throw the code over the fence and say, now it's open source. We need to really make the platform and the documentation and everything that goes around, or the tooling, make it ready to be really adopted by a community and developed by a community. So it was quite a bit of a challenge around, and documentation was no exception there. So, but folks, tell me a little bit about the pipeline. So you just hinted at, now we don't need to publish things ourselves anymore. Now the pipeline takes care of this, and we have some automated systems to deploy this as a help files or documents or PDFs or anything else. So how does that work? What do you use there for that?
So in the in the past, before we were open source, we would have to produce each PDF one by one manually. So there, at the time, I think there were about 20 books. Now we're up to about 23, I think. So we would have to actually compile it into a PDF, and then copy that file to a staging location so that it could be incorporated into the. At that time, we would put our software and everything onto CDs, because we were actually delivering hard copies. I would have to send the books off to the printer to be printed and bound. So we said, printed manuals as well. Nowadays, people are less inclined to want a printed manual. If they want to, they can print it themselves. It's pretty easy. But so we went from having to do that, and there were that of course means a lot of late nights. So if you finish and everything is ready, mid-afternoon, it might take 3 or 4 hours to print to compile every one of those PDFs and deliver it to the right place, because you'd have to print it, you'd have to publish or compile it, and then you'd have to turn pages and actually give it a sanity check and make sure that it came out okay. Because from time to time you get a blank page, or you'd get
so late nights and also last minute rushes to try to get it.
So it wasn't a lot of fun. So there were a lot of late nights. Now we check in our code, and everything is automated. When they build the platform for delivery, when they build an RC, a release candidate, or a gold version of the product, all the documentation is built and automatically uploaded to the website, to the HPCC Systems website. So it's all automated. So we're completely out of the publishing business. We do, during our unit testing and our code review, we build everything on a very similar system to get, and do all the sanity checks. We do all of that well in advance. But when it's time for release, everything just gets built automatically.
That is very cool. That is very cool. And but folks, and maybe Greg, so you do quite. How do you? The platform continues to change, and we do typically releases every. We do releases every week, RC candidates and new point releases. We do minor maybe every 2 or 3 months, and then we do major releases maybe once a year. So each one of these releases do introduce quite a bit of change. So how do you keep yourself up to the changes? How do you learn the new things? How do you know what to incorporate into the documentation?
Well, you see, a lot of that is the process that we've built into it, because the XML is, we treat the documentation as this XML object, and we check it into a repository. So the repository does a lot of the versioning for us. So if we make an update that's going into the 8.0 version of the software, well, we check it into that branch in the repository. So all the XML is just like, we check it into a code database, if you will, documentation database. And then when we build, we have scripts that launch, and they run a lot of the processes that we've automated. So it takes the XML and then it builds it and it's always in sync with the version that we're releasing, because we check it into that branch of the repository. So we're basically letting the technology do a lot of the management stuff that we used to do manually for us. So
very good. So, but how do you, in general, keep up with the fact that there is now a new primitive in ECL, or that there is new functionality that you need to document on the ECL watch interface, or that there is a new deployment system?
So some of that is because we have to be wizards, and we have to know where the software is going before it gets there. But I'll let Jim handle it.
Well, actually, our Jira issue tracking system helps us with that. So when let's say, for example, they add a new parameter to a built-in action in ECL, the person that checks in that code is responsible for creating a documentation issue with the details and a link to the actual code that they just checked in. So we get notified, or I would get notified first, and I would triage the issue and assign it to either myself or to Greg, and read the issue and see what information was there. If there wasn't sufficient information, go back to the parent or the linked issue to see what was actually changed, and then communicate with the developer right in that same issue. So if I have a question, I don't have to send him an email or send him an instant message of any kind. I could just put the question right into the Jira issue and say, is this, what does a 0 mean for this? What does a -1 mean for this? How do I disable this feature? And they would answer the questions right there. and it's very handy, and that's where we do our work from the notes that we've put in that Jira issue.
That is very clever. That's very good.
So
So
There are
every time a developer checks in code, there's a series of checkboxes that they have to check. You know, did I follow the, did I do all my unit testing? Did I do this? Did I do that? Does this affect documentation? And if it does, did I open an issue? So it's not foolproof. It's still, there's still human errors. There's nothing to prevent that, but it works. It's very few things get checked into the code that we don't hear about because we forgot about that this needed documentation.
But sometimes we do still have to use our wizarding skills to interpret what that change was and how we're going to document that. And then in some products, which are unwieldy because they have several attributes, was the configuration book. And I think maybe Jim would like to expand on that a little bit. So he had an idea.
When we had the configuration book, there are the configuration options for the HPCC Systems platform has about 3,000 attributes, 3,000 settings that can be changed. You don't need to change them all, but people need to know that they exist and what each one of them does. So it was very difficult before we were open source. I would take I had a script that I would run, and it would make me a list of all the new attributes, and then I'd have to figure out what those all meant. It was very hard to keep that in sync. But now we generate the tables of the list of attributes and their meanings automatically. We actually do that right from the code. Those are XSD files, which is another form of XML, and they're text based. So we have processes that would extract the information from that and put it into a table, and then include it into a book that was already that we have already prepared for that.
So we sort of automated that, yeah.
So if a developer would add a setting to a component, let's say Dolly gets added, gets a new attribute added, it would automatically get put into the book for that version. So again, very tightly coupled, the documentation very tightly coupled to the version of the software.
It's because we moved to an open standards based system like we have, where we were allowed to run a process against the XSD file and extract that information and build the documentation from that component file without having to manually intervene. And it's kind of almost, not quite, self-documenting software. Almost. Not quite there yet.
You just need to move to the next stage, right, and run Doxygen and automatically generate all the documentation. Yeah, that would be a little bit.
It's a similar paradigm as what
Similar
would do. But no, we didn't want to make it do everything because we wanted to maintain employment.
Well, no, yeah, I see. Yeah, well. So even if something can auto-document, I don't know, interfaces in your code, that doesn't mean that we'll put any explanation of what they are and what they are for. And
right.
But
that's our wizarding skills again. We have to interpret that.
To further answer your question of how we learn new things, so a lot of the times all the information can be conveyed through the Jira issue. But there's sometimes when we need a live demo or face to face, and we have all the tools at our disposal. We were using Microsoft Teams and video conferencing software way before the pandemic. So
yes.
So it was when we transitioned to everybody working from home, it was not a hard transition for us because all of us worked from home at least one day per week. So it was very easy. So we use the tools that we have, the tools and the technology that we have, to communicate with our developers, who are all around the world.
This is very cool, and that is very true from very long time, right? We have developers all over the place, so there is no way you can just pretend that you will go to a meeting room and then have all of them sitting there. So, yeah.
But they are sitting there just like we're sitting here now, where you and I are hundreds of miles apart, and it's just like if you're here in my office.
Yes, absolutely, yes, yeah.
And that's the great part about the paradigm that we have, because we're a complete boundaryless development team. The developers could be whenever, creating code, creating Jira issues. We could open up the Jira issues, work, and then check it into our repository. We don't have to be physically in the same building. Or, hey, Jim, are you in that file? No, we just check it in.
And also even operating from different time zones when you are in different parts of the world, like in this particular case, also time zones can be a problem. If you have someone that is shifted by 5, 6, 7 hours from you, trying to find a common time to have a conversation, sometimes it's challenging. So yeah, this is very good.
We try to use the time zone, the time difference to our advantage. So I'll ask a question at the end of my day here in the United States.
Very good.
And then I'll go to bed and I'll wake up the next morning. And when I wake up the next morning, it's midday in the UK, and I'll find that I've got answers to the questions that I asked the night before. So I just keep right on working. So we try to use it. We try to leverage the time zone rather than have it be a hindrance.
That's smart. It's very smart.
It gets tricky this time of year when we have daylight savings time, because in the United States, we change our clocks 2 weeks before they change the clocks in the UK. So things kind of get out of sync for a little while.
Yeah, there are only 4 hours rather than 5. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, folks, this was great. We had a great conversation. I just don't want to make this too long, otherwise it gets harder for those that want to listen to this entire podcast. But it has been great. I think it's been a great ride. And again, as I said at the beginning, happy birthday, HPCC Systems.
Happy birthday.
10 years is a long time, and it has aged very well. We've done so many new things, and as you both said, the amount of innovation that went into documentation. And documentation seems to be many times for people that are outside of the problem, they just think that it's something static. And documentation is live. It's as live as the code. So it needs to be also handled the same way.
Very, very much so. So I'm going to make a point of watching this video in another 10 years to see what's changed when we do our 20th anniversary.
Of course. And our 50th anniversary. But I said that I might not be around for our 50th anniversary, so who knows? Anyway, folks, thank you very much. This was great. This was a great conversation. Thank you for everything you do, and stay around. We'll see each other sometime.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks. Take care. It was fun. Thank you.